days, 3 months. And there is a difference between the tenure of elected executive officials and the National Assembly. For the executive, the tenure belongs to the individual. So the tenure begins from the date you swear an oath, the oath of office. But for legislative houses, the tenure belongs to the legislature. So if you are elected in a by-election 6 months to the end of tenure of that legislative house, you serve for 6 months. If you are elected at the beginning of tenure, you serve for 4 years. So that one is easier to manage. And that is why we conduct by-elections for legislative elections only. We don't conduct by-elections for governor and deputy governor, or president and vice president, because there is automatic process of succession involving those who are running mates and are serving as deputies, or in the case of a deputy governor with the approval of the state assembly, or in the case of the vice president with the approval of the National Assembly. So it's quite straightforward. Honorable Bob, you touched on a very, very important issue. We need a big, major conversation in this country. Nigeria has no election season any longer. I said earlier that in Ghana, they conducted only 3 by-elections between one general election and another. In our own case, even before the midterm, vacancies have now occurred in 21 constituencies. But not only that, we also have 8 governorship elections conducted off-cycle. So the commission is conducting elections virtually all year round. We have little time to recover our senses and begin to plan for the next election. For instance, in the election year 2023, we conducted 3 off-cycle governorship elections. The registered voters in some of the states is actually bigger than some of the countries in our sub-region. In Edo State, for instance, with 2.5 million registered voters, they have more voters than the Republic of Liberia. So a governorship election in Ondo is like, Edo is like a governorship election in Liberia. The state with the smallest number of registered voters in Nigeria is Ekiti. Ekiti has more registered voters than the Republic of Gambia. And it has more registered voters than Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde put together. So conducting election in Nigeria is huge. Then we come to the issue of cost of conducting elections. I'm going to say 2 things briefly, because I will speak to this in greater detail when I present our proposals for 2025 on the conduct of elections. But I think the second thing to say is that these are fresh elections, the by-elections, the off-cycle governorship elections, involving the whole gamut of the processes, including conduct of party primaries. This nation is spending and spending on the conduct of elections. We need to do 2 things. One, to find a more cost-effective way of dealing with these elections. Or secondly, to find a way of dealing with them. In the United States, they hardly conduct special election called by-election. They only do so in a few states. So it's not every time that a vacancy occurs in the Senate or in the House of Representatives that they conduct elections. In the Senate, the governor of the state will nominate someone to complete the tenure, often from the party of the deceased candidate. But in our own case, we conduct by-elections. And some of these by-elections are complicated. In 2018, for 2 by-elections, we ended up conducting 6 by-elections. What happened was 2 senators died. Vacancies were declared. We went to conduct the by-elections to the Senate. After the by-elections, we were told that we are going back to a part of that constituency again, the senatorial district. Why? Because 2 serving members of the House of Representatives contested for the election to the Senate and won, and created vacancies in the House of Representatives. So we went and conducted the by-elections. And we were told again that we are going back to a part of that federal constituency. Reason, 2 members of the State Assembly contested for election to the House of Representatives and created vacancies in the state constituencies. So when in February we were confronted with a similar situation, in the cases of, I think, Ebonyi South and Yobe South, we appealed to political parties in Nigeria. We had a meeting with them to please nominate fresh candidates, not serving members of the National or State Assemblies, so that we could conduct only 1 elections. And happily, the parties agreed and nominated fresh candidates. But I'm making this observation without prejudice to some serving honorable members of the House of Representatives that are right now warming up to contest for senatorial election. Because if you do so, we will just end up conducting for the 2 senatorial districts 6 by-elections. It's so unnecessary. Finally, we have made some recommendations. We have made some recommendations in the second document we shared with distinguished senators and honorable members. That is our review report. We have 142 recommendations. 8 relate directly with the activities of the National Assembly. I hope very soon the chairman of the joint committees will fix a date for us to have a retreat. Let us lock ourselves somewhere in another city in Nigeria and discuss these issues very, very carefully. The conduct of election is becoming a big burden. What is INEC? INEC is the Independent National Electoral Commission. The same constitution that creates INEC also creates the SIECs, the State Independent Electoral Commissions. But at the Independent National Electoral Commission, we are conducting more than the national elections. What are the national elections? Presidential and National Assembly. But we are conducting governorship and state assembly elections, and even local government elections in the Federal Capital Territory, the only part of the country where INEC conducts these elections. But before you get to elections, there are certain activities that have to be conducted. That is why INEC is called an electoral commission. There is a difference between an electoral commission and an elections commission, because we just don't do balloting. So we register voters, we create polling units, we give voters PVCs, we register political parties and regulate them, we create constituencies. But this is for all types of elections nationwide. But the states are not contributing. The funding for election is coming essentially from the federal government's own share. We are going to make a proposal at the meeting we are going to hold very soon, that we should perhaps consider the possibility of taking a percentage from the federation account for the funding of elections. But to say that INEC is going to fund elections only on the federal government's own share will contribute to the burden that Honorable Bob said, and also the situation we have when you are presented with an envelope and that envelope cannot deal with the situations. But I beg your, I crave your indulgence to stop here, but I'm going to say more when I present our proposal for 2024. You will see the reality that I'm talking about very clearly, particularly what is going to happen in 2025. The 40 billion simply wouldn't do. Thank you very much, John Chair. Okay, thank you very much. So we go to document number 2. Document number 2 is the envelope for 2025. Our first observation is that that envelope is the same as last year. The same as last year. And we know that the variables and factors have all changed. But we are given the same envelope of 40 billion in 2025 that we are given in 2024. With the new minimum wage and consequential adjustment, and the fact that INEC has one of the largest workforces in the country, 40 billion cannot do. It cannot even pay personnel cost. we have over 14,700 personnel. Beyond the career officers in the commission has 51 what the law calls political office holders. The chairman, 12 national commissioners, 37 resident electoral commissioners, and the commission secretary that are also paid out of the 40 million. So this money will simply not do. So in terms of the breakdown, we have only 2 lines: consolidated salary, full stop. It cannot even pay the allowances of staff. So something has to be done about it. What are the reasons that we think something has to be done about the budget? For instance, the 40 billion has not taken into account activities, particularly elections that we are going to conduct in 2025 or make substantial preparations for the elections in 2025. And let me enumerate them. We have already released the timetable for the Anambra governorship election. Party primaries for Anambra State will begin on the 20th of March in the next 2 months and will end on the 10th of April. And there's no provision in the budget for the Anambra governorship election. And there will be many other activities leading to the election in November. Secondly, the area council elections in the Federal Capital Territory, the only part of the country where INEC conducts local government elections. There is no provision in the 2025 budget for the area council elections holding in February next year. Although it is holding in February next year, virtually all the activities will have to be conducted in 2025, including the conduct of primaries and the nomination of candidates. According to the law, parties must nominate candidates for the election not later than 180 days, 6 months before the date fixed for the election. So the activities will happen in 2025. Then we have 2 off-cycle governorship elections holding next year. The governorship elections in Ekiti and Osun. Activities for the Ekiti and Osun governorship election will start this year, including the conduct of party primaries for the Ekiti and Osun elections, which again, as I said earlier, according to the law, it must be concluded not later than 180 days before the date fixed for the election, which is 6 months. The last governorship election in Ekiti State took place in June, and in Osun in July, meaning that primaries will have to be conducted in 2025. Not only that, we have other electoral activities and preparations for 2027 general election. I know the law says that funds for the election should be released to the commission 1 year to the election. But forward planning requires that we do some of the activities earlier rather than wait until the election year. For instance, we have not resumed the continuous voter registration, and many Nigerians have come of age, and those who could not for one reason or another register earlier would like to register as voters. Provision has to be made for that to happen. If we do the registration at ward level, we are talking about 8,809 centers nationwide. But if we do the election, the registration at local government level, we are talking about 774 centers, plus our 37 offices in the states and the FCT. So we have to resume the CVR in 2025. Because again, the law says that the CVR must end not later than 90 days before the date fixed for the election. So CVR will end next year. It has to start this year. We can't start next year and then end it the same year. Number 2, distribution of voters to polling units. And I would like to say that you can't have a credible election without a credible register of voters. It's critical. But the second thing we need to do is, having succeeded for the first time in a quarter of a century to expand voter access to polling units, there is need to look at the distribution of voters to those polling units. Right now, there are polling units that have thousands of registered voters. Others only have a handful. We need as much as possible to redistribute the voters to the polling units to as near parity as is practicable. If you don't do that, it also impacts on the conduct of credible elections. You have a register of voters, but the voters have no place to vote. So that right cannot be exercised in the absence of a place to vote. We would like to do that in 2025. The third one is replacement of lost or damaged materials and facilities. We lost so many PVAS machines from the general election to the off-cycle governorship elections to court-ordered run elections and the by-elections. We need to begin to systematically replace them. Now, all the machines are insured. And so far we have claimed insurance for over 440 BVAS machines, amounting to 205 million. But INEC does not retain the money. The money is paid into the federal government coffers. So we have to make provision in the budget for government to provide the resources for us to replace the PVAS machines. Number two, we lost quite a number of ballot boxes. Those ballot boxes have to be replaced, including loss of ballot boxes in Gwere West, local government office in Benue State as a result of attack. It has nothing to do with elections. Some people were angry somewhere and decided to attack public facilities, including banks and the local government secretariat. And unfortunately in Ika, Northeast local government area of Delta State, our office was gutted by fire last month, and we lost so many ballot boxes. We need to replace those ballot boxes. We also lost quite a number of voting cubicles. We need to replace those voting cubicles. We also need to progressively renovate and rehabilitate our fiscal facilities. The last time I appeared before the House Committee, no, the last but one time, I made an elaborate presentation on the number of local government offices of the Commission still in local government secretariats. We had a rolling plan over the years. We moved many of them outside the local government secretariats, but we still have 59 that are still in the local government secretariats. There has to be a provision in the budget for us to maintain and rehabilitate those buildings. What many people may not realize or may not know is that in addition to conducting elections and electoral activities, INEC also manages some of the largest buildings of any agency in this country. We have over 860 buildings nationwide in varying states of dilapidation. We have 774 local government offices, 37 state offices. We have our headquarters in Abuja. We have zonal and subzonal stores, our Electoral Institute, over 860 buildings. So provision has to be made in the budget to capture this. And then when we talk about the by-elections and end of tenure elections to be prepared for this year, that will also include the conduct of party primaries by political parties. If a political party is conducting direct primaries starting at ward level, we have to deploy our officials to each one of the 8,809 wards. But again, this is part of the problem and it's adding to the cost. When you deploy staff, you pay their DTA. And sometimes when they are deployed to a particular state, the party will now write to say, we are sorry, we are postponing it until next week. It means we have to demobilize the staff and remobilize them. And the budget doesn't provide for demobilization and remobilization endlessly. So there are so many issues to consider. 2025 is a critical year in our preparations for the 2027 general elections. So this amount in the envelope that we are given is inadequate for those activities. So as we did last year, you asked us, you said, okay, what do you require? We said, over 80 billion, and we provided a detailed breakdown of how we propose to spend the 80 billion. And that leads me to the third document that we are presenting today. And the third document is our proposal for 2025. The Commission requires the sum of 126 billion, but we have a 15-page document that has provided details line by line on how we intend to spend the 126 billion. So I would like the support of members of the National Assembly to ensure that we are adequately funded for the responsibilities we are required to discharge. And most of these responsibilities are constitutional. They are not just in the Electoral Act. They are not just for propriety. They are also constitutional. Thank you very much, Joint Chair.